introduce yourself and where you were based and a little bit of what you were doing before this 2020 COVID-19 started to happen.
All the craziness. No,
Yes.
sure. No, no, my pleasure. So, my name is Christopher Lee. I am a Chinese Caribbean Canadian citizen of the world, if you may.
Hmm.
I am based in Beijing, China, and right there I am currently doing language training as well as I'm a tourism research and development consultant. I've been there for about 3.5 years now. And
Hmm.
before COVID, I actually was on vacation. So I was having a great time, and I still am having a good time, but there was definitely a lot of adjusting to do before the wake of COVID.
Okay. So you said you were there for 3 years now.
About three
What
and a half, yeah.
3.5 years? So what made you originally make that move to China?
hmm So originally, my background's in hospitality. I
Hmm.
worked at the Hilton, and then subsequent to that, I felt that I was interested in looking for some new experiences. So I went to a conference in the south of China in a place called Hainan. And while I was there, to cut a long story short, I saw a niche for myself being kind of a gateway between the Barbadian delegation and the Chinese delegation. So I thought, why not go up and try and explore and see what China had to offer. As a result, I got a scholarship and I went and did my master's, and then I've just kind of been there ever since, exploring, trying to build my career as a consultant.
Okay, so you're looking to be based in China as a consultant there.
In the short run, yes, yes. So in the next, so I would say that timeline wise, I try to be there within the next 3 to 5 years to build up my brand, my name, especially because a lot of my focus outside of training within the tourism and hospitality field, it's also working on creating opportunities and using tourism and culture as a bridge between the Caribbean, but to start initially between Barbados and China, and then to expand that to the Caribbean and China/Asia.
Okay, cool. So what was everyday kind of life like for you in China?
Right. So one of the interesting things is, of course, everybody is going to have a different experience, and we have a growing community of Barbadians that are in China at the moment. Majority of us do come on as students. Some are there as young professionals, and for me, an everyday life would be comprised of school and work, and then of course some other kind of social projects that I'd be working on. I think one of the most interesting things about that experience is just because I am of Chinese descent. And so
Mhm.
as a result, there was a lot of maneuvering in terms of my Chinese identity, in terms of people assuming whether I was Chinese or not, and just trying to adapt to the cultural differences. Because although I grew up with some of the upbringing of my Chinese ancestry from my mom and my grandmother, I still would identify more closely with a Caribbean upbringing.
Okay. So when did you make the decision to leave China and return to Barbados?
Yeah. So as I said before, I was vacationing. So in China and in Asia, we have the Chinese New Year holiday. There's
Hmm.
two golden weeks, but one of the main ones is during the Chinese New Year, which is January into February. And at
Hmm.
that time, I was in Vietnam and I was visiting some friends. Thank goodness. That could have been that. It really could have turned out a lot worse. But I was visiting friends, and at that time, I went to when that was when things were really starting to develop. So they found out the COVID had surfaced in Wuhan, and then it started to spread. And then at that time, the WHO had already said, okay, it's fine. We're going to let China take care of it once they have it under control. We don't need to call it is it a pandemic?
Yeah.
Yes. But unfortunately, by the time I got to Vietnam, a few days later, is when they cited a first set of cases outside of China, and then
Okay.
at that point, it started to just have this domino effect, and then they cut all the flights from to and from China, which then left me with not many other options other than it was either kind of float around in Southeast Asia for a bit, live kind of the nomad life, or come back to another base. And that's what made me decide. I thought it would be a lot more stable and then also financially viable for me to fly back to Barbados.
Okay. While you were in Vietnam for that period and all of this is starting to happen where there are a few cases cited, what was that like in environment-wise and what was going on through your head as well? And news-wise, what it was like for Vietnam hearing that this was happening as well?
Interestingly enough, I feel kind of like I lived that experience twice over. So the first was in Vietnam and then again in Barbados, whereby because the virus started in one place and then slowly expanded, everybody who was not in close proximity, because China's quite large, yes? So those of us in Beijing would have said, okay, it's in Wuhan, that's scary, but at least it's not close to Beijing. So we weren't panicked. Then it went to China. So in Vietnam, I got the sense that at least for the first few days, everybody was quite relaxed. They were aware of this situation, but there was still kind of almost a naive nature where they're saying, "Oh, this is not going to affect us." You know, even though Vietnam is on the border of southern China. And so when the cases broke, I felt that you can slowly see the tension increase. You can slowly see people start to become more conscious of their personal space, of personal hygiene. And then when the government, I think the real transition point was when the government starts to shut down public spaces because they're trying to prevent the spread of the virus and prevent people congregating. Yes? So that is really what happened. It started very relaxed because Vietnam is also during Chinese New Year.
Okay, so when we say team mix Olivia. That's fine. Let's continue on.
Okay, so during Chinese New Year, it's especially being in the tourism industry, it's a huge travel period, and especially for Southeast Asia, they get a lot of Chinese tourists. So it's very, very important for them economically. Because you go China, Vietnam, a lot of Chinese travel to those countries. So one of the things, in addition to just the safety factor of it, is that when you started to see public places being shut down in Vietnam, when you started to see those flights closing down, then of course the first thing comes to mind is with Vietnam is, oh, this is really going to impact our economy. And so that's why I said I feel like I lived it twice times over, because then when I came to Barbados, Barbados, I was fortunate enough to miss the mad rush of when everybody was trying to rush back home, because I made the decision quite early before it came all the way over to the US. But when I landed in Barbados, and I was fortunate to be 21 days out of China, so I didn't need to. I took the necessary precautions, but I wasn't under lockdown or self-quarantine. I can slowly start to see how the virus started to just make its way over to the Western Hemisphere, and then see that tension rise, see people start to become more aware of personal space and hygiene and so forth. So that was a really, really interesting experience for me.
Yeah. Right. So you mentioned that you came home before, so you would have returned to Barbados, I'm figuring somewhere in January, February.
Yes, I came around mid-February.
Mid-February. So you've come to Barbados, and then, as you just mentioned, you slowly started to see things progress into the Western Hemisphere. And you're now entering a situation where we are being told, be cautious, but, it's still fine, it's still fine. And then March, we're seeing cases. What was that like for you?
I feel like because I was already on the east and I already saw kind of what could have happened, my mindset was just be as cautious as possible. And so as a result, I was prepared fully that we were going to go to the full extent where the government would need to enforce certain rules and legislation so that they could try to contain the virus. So it didn't have too much of a drastic impact on me as it changed to adjustment. But what I will say to that is that another part that really helped me was because living in China. So one of the successful factors why China was able to kind of control and manage the situation is because living in China, while definitely I have my full stream of rights and privileges, they're definitely more organized, and they definitely have a lot of more different types of framework in place for national management of resources and movement of people. And so that was just normal to me. So when things started to lock down in Barbados and they said, oh, you couldn't go to the beach, of course I was bummed, because I love going to the beach. It was
Yeah.
as soon as I came back, I said, Chris, you're going to the beach every day to make the most of it. But I felt that this was something inevitable and necessary. So it wasn't too drastic of an adjustment for me.
Okay. Um, Sorry about that, but it's recording from home, so there are people in and out.
It happens, no worries.
All right. So you are still in contact with some of the persons in China because you obviously have friends and colleagues that you left behind. What are some of the things that they've been sharing with you since they're there and have left?
Well, the thing is, what a lot of people don't know, unless you probably have lived or do live in China, is the the kind of proactive nature that Chinese people do have and China does have on a whole. So the first step was contain the virus, manage the situation, but definitely right behind that was we need to open back up as soon as possible. We need to get jobs going, which is exactly what the Barbados government is in doing as well. So in speaking to them, you could see where the government was already trying to balance between, okay, we want you to be safe, you need to listen to the different guidelines by us and the WHO, but a lot of my friends were already being given online opportunities. And in addition to that, because China is so on board with using technology and so forth, and then even very important parts of daily life in China, such as online payments and so forth, that made it easy for people to say, okay, well, I already pay via mobile payments anyways, or via phone and online. So for them, it's been okay. I think the hardest part is when so compared to Barbados, where maybe you can still look outside and you see the beautiful sun and you see the beautiful sea, I would say just like any other city, for my friends, for example, in Beijing, it's tough being in a cold environment, tough being in an apartment, and then Beijing is more polluted than Barbados is. So I think that is more of the adjustment, especially those of my friends that are from islands like the Philippines and so forth.
Okay. So you're here in Barbados and you've been working for the last little bit in China. So how has that adjustment been for you with having to take your work now, not just time zone wise, I can imagine, but having to do it in an online environment totally?
To be honest, it was a blessing in disguise. It was not easy because I think I thrive. In my opinion, my strength is thriving in face-to-face interaction, face-to-face training, and that's how I operated. But it was something that was in my plans to try and move a lot of my work online, and so this is just something that happened, and I just had to run with it. I'm still in the process of figuring out a lot of things out, as many people are, but I think that similar to my situation, I think the Caribbean, this situation, we will look back on this and think look at the benefits that came out of this in terms of trying to move on and embrace technology in a more integral way into the way we do business, the way we communicate, and so forth. And also looking at different ways to diversify. So as I said before, I had a plan. I was dealing with training and then also dealing with the research and development with the Sino-Caribbean relationship. But then it also had me definitely in a state of mind to think, okay, is there another way I can approach my business so that I can kind of look back at the model? Maybe it would have worked in the previous situation pre-COVID. So now that we have this where most of it's online, maybe there's some things I need to change. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay. I know this a bit about you. You come from a very tight-knit family, sorry. And how has this been for your family, having to stay in place and not always be able to be together as the way they usually are?
Definitely an adjustment. I mean, I think by nature, most people are social beings, and we crave or we really enjoy that physical interaction, especially myself. Funny enough, when I came to Barbados, a lot of my friends, knowing how affectionate I am physically, they had to say, Chris, okay, social distancing, let's do elbow bump. So that was probably and my family was a part of that process because they know how I am generally. But I think it just depends on your mindset. So what my family just did is say, okay, we can't meet physically. We'll have online game night and we'll have Zoom conversations. And I think this has opened up a whole it's really opened up the door, because not only am I interacting now with my family in Barbados quite a lot via online, but we had birthday parties with my family in Australia and in Canada and Trinidad. And we also I attended a really fun like online soca party. And you'd be amazed that with the right level of orchestration, how you can use the platform to still keep that connection close, whether it be family, friends, colleagues, or otherwise.
Okay, cool. So we're slowly coming back to, I guess, what we consider normal here in Barbados, where they're relaxing some of the restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see us as a society going, or what are some of the things you think we need to do now coming out of this, or look at coming out of this from your perspective?
Well, as I would have mentioned, we need to look at our existing model, look at what are the different things we need to tweak, modify, or upgrade. And especially when it comes to the engaging and embracing technology in a more integral way, I think that's kind of the key thing. Outside of that, I think we also need to look at key areas of concern, which has always been for Barbados, such as food security, being able to be a bit more self-sufficient, and history has shown that we have had a history of being able to provide for ourselves for a certain period of time. And I think that if we really put our minds to it, that we can really kind of come out of this by pulling up, tightening the belt a little bit, cutting down the fat where necessary, and then also reinventing what we need to do, and also diversifying, not just when it comes to technology and the way we do things as individual businesses, but diversifying our industries, because Barbados is a very tourism dependent industry. And as much as it is it's an industry that I've been in for a very long time, I think one of the things China has taught me is how tourism is so connected to so many other industries that you can try to still stay in tourism, but not in the traditional way that we've been doing it for so long, and so dependent on the tourists to just physically come here. And then also not just tourism, but tourism and culture, because there's a very big discussion that I've been involved in on looking at the creative economy and how can we really export our creative services to the world and throughout the region, and sharing and so forth. So that's something I think we can really focus on.
Yeah, actually, you kind of perfectly actually segue into my question I was going to follow, because I was going to ask you, since you were in the hospitality industry for so many years working at the Hilton here, and then that's what you studied in China, where do you see us going next? Are there some of the things that have to happen for us to continue and move forward in our tourism product?
Well, it's an interesting time to think about that, because of course being that our traditional markets are still themselves trying to get back on their feet. I definitely think there's been some discussion I've seen in the paper, and as a region trying to look more within the region, trying to further develop interregional travel, and I'm very much for that. I think if we're going to do it slow and steady, I don't think opening up the floodgates one time, and I think Prime Minister Motley has done a good job. So first we resume and try and get our services and everything, everyday life back to normal in the country. Then we can do to regional and try and help each other regionally, and then go back to our traditional markets from there. And then being someone who's in China as well, maybe again look at opportunities to say, well, are there any new other markets that would have been interested or are that we could possibly tap into in the long haul? But that's again more forward thinking and future thinking.
Okay, so we have seen globally a rise of hate and xenophobic behavior towards persons that are of Asian descent, or Asians living in different parts of the world. Could you share with me a little bit, like also to like just as such, like what your family being here in this region, and then also then expand on what you are seeing now with this type of hate and violence that's happening towards the Asian community because of the COVID-19 situation, from the being coming out of or starting first cases coming out of China.
Well, I mean, what I can say, so first I'll speak from my personal experience. I'm very fortunate that I have not personally experienced any sort of discrimination or hatred towards myself or my family directly. Indirectly, though, I know for a fact that it has impacted a lot of businesses, especially Chinese-owned businesses in Barbados and in many other parts of the diaspora. And I think it's an unfortunate realization that that sense of discrimination and that I think level of ignorance. I mean, you want to give people an opportunity to say, okay, I get it, you're nervous, you're not, there's a lot of uncertainty, but sometimes when you make those type of connections, you say, well, it's a Chinese-owned business, but that person has not come from China directly. And even if that person came from China directly, then it's more about trying to trust in the process and the system whereby people are quarantined or tested, because that's really how people effectively manage the situation. It's test and isolate. But when it came to the way that Chinese people were really kind of just singled out, you know, it didn't make me feel good. And so what I did in doing my part, I think all I can do is try to I'm trying to find the right word. Try to just be a source of be sympathetic and say, okay, I understand why you would feel concerned, and I can understand the human side of it. However, you know, just know that we're humans too. We are also going through this, and And I think on a personal note, like just discrimination in general is really not one that I think we should tolerate, whether it be against Chinese people, gay people, you know, just the whole spectrum. And having said that, I mean, one of the things that then kind of flipped over that you saw is there was some speculation of the treatment of Africans, for example, in China. And again, I also was very vocal in that discrimination or perceived discrimination of any kind should not be tolerated, and that we are all human at the end of the day, and we are all fighting this pandemic together. And we would find more success if we try to find the commonalities and bind together the effort instead of isolating one another.
Yes, agreed. So we're, I guess, in Barbados, seeing a situation where people are starting to also come back to their return repatriation flights happening and that sort of thing. You said you came, I guess, a few weeks before this even was necessary.
21. Well, I came at 21 days. So the original quarantine period was 14 days before. You had to be, once you were out of China, 14 days. But then by the time I got here, it had increased to 21. So I was lucky that I had been out of China for 21 days prior, because I made sure to quarantine in Vietnam.
Yeah. In just general, I don't, because I know you know a lot of persons that are traveling, and what has that, I guess, scenario, the whole traveling industry been for not just yourself, but for others to try to find their way back home? Like when you were in Vietnam, because I know you mentioned some of this before, but when you were in Vietnam, like trying to just scramble to make your way back home, was it chaotic? Like
right.
How was that?
Well, like I said, I'm very grateful that I was able to make it back before the mad rush. You know, I had friends that kept me well informed of what was going on, and so it was very calculated. It was a bit unnerving at times to think, okay, what am I going to do? Especially because my base is in Beijing, my career is in Beijing. I'm developing things there. But I was very fortunate that it wasn't a scramble. It was kind of a, okay, you have two choices. So I had to kind of just simplify it to myself. In terms of going through the airports, again, because I came before the mad rush, the airports were still relatively like relaxed. They still had their measures in place, but it was definitely not as strict as they would be now, because the rate of and the spread of infection was not as violent as it is now.
Okay. I know we don't have a date yet when things, travel is going to happen, or we know that this is all over. But do you see yourself, once we've reached some level of control over COVID-19, resuming and taking back your career in Beijing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, of course, there's always the theoretical plan, and then what can actually happen. So, I mean, based on reports, they say that things should open back up, commercial flights, hopefully in the summer. I've made a tentative plan to go back in September, and so we'll just see from there. It's kind of the whole situation is really a play by ear scenario, and you have to just see, because there's always a case of a second wave of reinfection. Systems breaking down. You're just not sure, which is again why, going back to when you asked me about my recommendations with opening up and tourism, is that it really should just be a slow and steady step-by-step process, because at the end of the day, the best way to manage it is making sure that you have the preparation and the safety measures in place, that when you open up, that you can handle that if a second wave comes around, because the reality is then people are going to be circulating more, whether it be not just right now, they're testing the waters with national, because they've allowed people to go to the beaches and so forth, then with regional, because you need that, and then when again opening up to our key markets. So we need to make sure that we are prepared first. But yes, so my plan is for September, to answer your question.
September. Yeah. Okay. What's the one thing you miss most right now that you're not able to have access to?
I miss hugging. It sounds really silly. I'm a hugger, and it's like the simplest thing ever, but I really, really miss a hug. Like, I miss hugging people and giving that sense of, it's my way of also giving a sense of support and comfort. And I know that, again, my situation is a lot better than most, and I probably, if I could give a hug to especially those people right now that are hurting, those who have lost loved ones, those who just are alone, because I mean, there's a lot of elderly people, especially in Barbados, who, when you call them or you try to help them out, the one thing that they're just missing is just that, that interaction. So I think it's the physical, the ability to just touch somebody, even if it's a handshake, it really does, it's very, very powerful. And even with relating it to my work, I fully endorse and embrace, and I'm ready to take on online and use with technology. However, there's nothing like that face-to-face interaction when you're giving a speech or you're doing that training, and that there's definitely a difference in the impact. So definitely I miss that a lot.
Well, thank you